Welcome to King County Connects, a program that connects you with the regional issues facing us. I'm Kimberly Hill. The King County Council recently purchased a portion of the Eastside rail corridor, finalizing the dream of preserving the corridor that stretches from Renton to Snohomish County and setting it aside for public use. Thank you so much for being here today. This is very exciting news and something you guys have been working on for a long time.
10 years.
Very exciting news.
What does this mean? What does the purchase encompass?
The purchase encompasses 42 miles of public right-of-way that was originally a rail corridor owned by Burlington Northern Santa Fe. And in 2003, the port bought it and was going to sell it directly to us. And we felt it was very important to keep this corridor in public ownership because it's an opportunity for all sorts of infrastructure to take place along that 42 miles. It's basically a corridor for the 21st century.
There was a lot of interest in the corridor in terms of like maybe dividing it up for developers or...
There was a lot of interest when Burlington Northern decided that they didn't need it any longer for their purposes. They did offer it to the public, and we did step up and say that that was an important public asset that we needed to move into public ownership. It took a while and get the interest correct, but now we have that corridor in perpetuity for public use, which will be extraordinary for our citizens for the future.
This last purchase was just 15 miles of it. Had you already bought the earlier part, or how did that work out?
So the county had acquired an easement that really at that point only allowed us to be able to have a trail within the corridor. What the acquisition now will provide not only the ability to develop the trail, but put into permanent public ownership the ability also to one day realize the goal of having light rail or high capacity transit through this corridor. The other thing that it will do is to maintain the region's ability to provide utility services to a growing region as well.
Well, a lot of interest in future uses for this. How will you determine how the trail is used?
Part of the legislation that we dealt with establishes the 42 miles as a corridor of regional significance, and it recognizes the owners and suggests that we get together as an advisory group and do a planning process that looks 50 plus years into the future for the capital and infrastructure needs and plan how we get there. So we've hired a facilitator already, and during the first quarter of 2013, stakeholders will be put together and we will come together with some recommendations that will go to the county executive, and he'll prepare a report by the end of the second quarter that talks about what the outcomes will be.
So who's on the advisory council for this?
The 5 owners, Sound Transit, the City of Redmond, the City of Kirkland, Puget Sound Energy, and King County.
What future uses might we see? What kind of developments might we see?
Well, that of course will be part of the planning process, but we've said consistently over the past 10 years that it needed to at least encompass dual use for pedestrian and bicycle use, trail activity, as well as the planning long-term for a transportation corridor that would include high-capacity transit or even light rail. And those rights and those interests have been preserved legally and are owned by the various entities that have a particular interest. And that's preserved for the planning process, but also for the use for the future. We had a underutilized asset, which now, over time, I think will be heavily utilized for the region.
Puget Sound Energy has easement rights above ground, below ground, and at the surface for a utility corridor. The county has also purchased an easement for wastewater transmittal. So we have definitely some utility opportunities there. In addition, we've heard from folks that might like to run an excursion train, much like the Spirit of Washington dinner train that used to run from Renton to Woodinville. So there are those opportunities as well for private use.
So this corridor actually goes through a very urban area. It's like the last strip of that long of a transportation corridor for that.
That's a really important point because when you consider where the corridor exists, it's through some of the most urbanized parts of King County. And what we know today is that the county is going to continue to grow. We're going to have more people, we're going to have more jobs, And so the opportunity to actually now preserve this open space for future recreational opportunity and future transportation opportunity is really a momentous and wonderful thing for the people here. Because the other thing when you consider is that when we think of where the growth is going to occur in the county, the Eastside and South King County are expected to take a lot of that growth. But as many of the council members pointed out through these deliberations, there are very few north-south corridors in that part of the county. And so the ability to take this action now is really, I think, going to pay off in the long run.
So there is a lot of interest in usage on this, and we're hearing a lot about rails and trails. From a practical point, how does that work? You have a bike trail next to the rail tracks?
In some places, it's going to be difficult. The actual right-of-way is not very wide. In other portions of the right-of-way, it's quite wide. So it is possible, as we've seen in other parts of the country, to combine a trail and rail use. That's what the planning process will allow us to do, to look at the best places to accommodate rail and trail in the future, and also make sure that we can get on with the trail experience sooner rather than later. But the corridor is preserved, and we have all those options in front of us, and that was the important point for this action this Monday.
The corridor is actually 100 feet, and so of that 100 feet, so many feet would be dedicated consecutively for light rail or rail, and so many feet would be dedicated to trail, and others would be left for the utility corridor. So that's part of the regional planning process, is designating where along the trail it would occur. And in places that are constricted because of wetlands or steep slopes, we'll have to figure out where else we can expand.
It sounds like the planning process has started, and that's a good beginning, and it's great that you have preserved this for the future. How long before somebody could actually be running on the trail or riding a bike? Is it another 10 years away? Or
the city of Kirkland actually put an issue on the November ballot that would allow them funds to pick up the rail and lay gravel. So theoretically, there are parts of the corridor that within the next 12 months could be available for active trail use.
And Sound Transit's already purchased in fee, and for its entire ownership, about 1.1 miles for East Link in terms of light rail coming to Bellevue and beyond. So usage is something that various parties see happening right away.
It's really exciting to think that Sound Transit will be looking at what's going to happen with Phase 3. And obviously the corridor is going to play very heavily into expansion plans. And cities along the east side that would never have had an opportunity to connect before, like Kirkland and Woodinville, and the last mile for Redmond will have an opportunity to be realized through this East Side Rail Corridor.
what are the next steps with the council? The recommendations come back next fall, and then what does it come back?
Hopefully, by the middle of next year, we will hear what the executive has in mind, and we will discuss it and obviously collaborate.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, we're appreciative of the council's action this past Monday, and so now that's going to start the next phase of the process by their action. The first of which is to set up this committee, and the council motion directs and asks the executive to come back with the 6-month process with the advisory council, and to really then come back with a recommendation surrounding the future development of the corridor based upon the collaboration of these regional parties.
What's the membership of the regional council? How many members?
So there's 5 members, as Council Member Haig alluded to earlier. And of course, King County would be convening this process, but it would include the other kind of legal owners, if you will, of the corridor to the degree they have their own separate interests, and that would be Puget Sound Energy, the City of Kirkland, the City of Redmond, and Sound Transit.
So a lot of great future planning to be made.
A lot of great. And then, of course, you know, that process is also going to include and will require the collaboration of the other cities that are in the corridor as well, such as the cities of Bellevue, Woodinville, and Renton.
And there are other stakeholders like the Cascade Bicycle Club, like the Audubon Society, like various passenger rail excursion groups that will want to weigh in as part of this strategic planning group that's being convened.
And those voices really need to be heard, and the process will be open to that, so we can have a broad spectrum of opinion and incorporate as much as possible moving forward. But there's a lot of excitement around the fact that this asset's now moved from private to public ownership. The broad parameters of what we're looking for over the horizon will be realized, but we want to make sure that everybody has a voice in terms of where we're headed, and we can plan accordingly now that the real estate interests have been parceled out to the right folks, and everybody has a stake in it.
Great news for citizens of King County.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on King County Connects. Visit us online at kingcounty.gov/KCTV.